Hey kids, it's Mrs. Fravel. How are you? Good, me too. It's fine. Okay, today we're going to talk about marine ecology. This is the beginning of Unit 2. We wrapped up oceanography last week. You should have gotten your tests done. You should have gotten all of your assignments submitted for Unit 1. Let's move on. So we are going to start talking about the actual ecosystems in the marine environment in the ocean. So let's just quickly cover what is an ecosystem? This should mostly be review from biology for you, but we're going to apply it a little more specifically to the ocean environments. Okay, so these are some of the ecosystems that we're going to talk about this year for the rest of the semester. We're going to talk about sandy beaches and the open ocean. We're going to talk about rocky shores and tidal pools. I'm hoping to talk about mangroves if we get time. Coral reefs will be our first ecosystem that we talk about starting 2 weeks. And then this is the deep water ecosystem. Okay, so we're going to talk about how these are all put together, but first you need to know a few terms when it comes to ecology and talking about ecosystems. Okay. So what is ecology? Ecology is a branch of science. It's the study of how abiotic and biotic factors in an ecosystem interact. Okay, and essentially, it's how the abiotic or non-living factors affect the biotic factors in any given area. So you want to make sure that you know those words. So abiotic, the word part A always means without. Bio always means life. So without life, this is the physical parts of an environment. And biotic, bio always means life. So that's the living organisms in an environment. Okay. Some of the abiotic factors that are looked at or that influence life in an ecosystem include the chemistry of the water itself, including the pH and the salinity. And let's just review really quickly what pH is from biology and chemistry. So pH is the amount of hydrogen ions that are in water or in a chemical. And the lower the number, the more acidic, the higher the number, the more alkaline. Ocean water averages out right about 8.3, 8.4 on the pH scale. So it's slightly basic, not quite neutral. Okay, it's a buffer zone. And then salinity, is the dissolved minerals in the water. We did a whole thing on that, right? Okay, so that chemistry in seawater will affect the animals that can live in any given environment or ecosystem. Okay. Also, what affects them is the pressure at the depth of their ecosystem. And remember, pressure is just the weight of the water column above you. So at a certain depth, you have a certain amount of atmospheric pressure pushing on your body. And that pressure affects how bodies function and how bodies are constructed. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about the pelagic zone ecosystem. Okay. Also, of course, temperature. Organisms are adapted to live at certain temperatures. Some of them have a wider range of temperatures that they can live in. Some larger, actually a lot of animals and organisms migrate or ride the currents as plankton throughout the ocean. So they have kind of a wider range of temperatures that they're okay at. But many of the organisms that stay in a local ecosystem, they are adapted to the temperature at that location. And if that temperature gets even just a little bit too warm or just a little bit too cold for too long, that can affect who lives and who does not live, and who sticks around and who migrates. Okay, what else? What's an ecosystem? An ecosystem is all of the biotic and all of the abiotic factors in a particular area. That's a pretty loose definition. Particular area means whatever the scientist, whatever the ecologist is studying. So an ecologist can choose to study a whole ocean. They can study the ecosystem of the Arctic Ocean, right? Or they can focus in and study the ecosystem of a particular place, a particular coral reef, a particular tide pool. Whatever they define it as an ecosystem when they're studying it and doing research, that's an ecosystem. We for class are going to look at the large larger ecosystems that are delineated by type in the marine environment, okay? All right, ecosystems consist of communities and abiotic factors. Community is all of the biotic organisms in an ecosystem. Okay. And let's not forget that the world doesn't have walls. So ecosystems overlap and they interact with each other quite a bit in the natural world. Okay. But all of them require a constant input of energy. That's usually, for most ecosystems, that input of energy is the sun. We're going to talk about food chains and food webs next time. In some ecosystems where there is no sun available, like down in the hadopelagic and abyssopelagic zones, there are other sources of energy that organisms utilize to run their metabolic functions. We'll talk about those. Okay, and in all ecosystems, it is a circle of life, my friends. Chemicals and nutrients are cycled within ecosystems. Organisms, when they are alive, they absorb, they eat, they utilize nutrients and other chemicals that are available in their ecosystem. As they do their metabolic processes, they're releasing waste. Those waste products are dealt with by the chemistry and by other organisms in their ecosystem. And then, of course, when they die, their body is returned to the ecosystem, decomposed and scavenged, and the nutrients from their tissues are returned to be used by other organisms. Circle of life, man. That's gonna flash, I don't know why. It's, hang on, animation. I'm not good. Okay. Let's talk about living things, shall we? Okay, so remember, population by definition is a group of the same species living in one area and interbreeding. Those populations have specific resources that they need to survive. We'll talk about those in a minute. These resources can affect the size of a population and how fast a population grows, especially if they are in short supply. There are two kinds of resources that living organisms are subject to in their ecosystem. And I'll talk about those. Limited resources means there's only sorry, I have a cat hair right here. You guys see my cat? He's getting hair all over me. It's making my face tickle. He was up here earlier. Anyway, to continue, now that you've caught up on notes. Limited resources means there's a finite supply of something. There's only so much to go around in any given ecosystem. The availability of that will limit the size of a population. Limiting resources means that those limiting resources will actually control the size of a population by removing members of a population. Okay, I'll talk about that in a minute. So what's the difference? So limited resources include food and nutrients, physical factors, space, and mates and reproductive opportunities. There's only so much of these to go around for any population. Okay? If any of them changes, there are responses in a population, and I'll go through those in just a sec. Limiting resources can include parasites and diseases. These put caps on the size of a population. Hey, we're kind of going through that right now within the human population, right? Predators keep a population in check as long as we as humans leave predators alone and let them live. And then physical factors as well, those limiting resources like chemistry, pH, temperature, stuff like that. Okay, so what can happen if any of these limited resources change or start to affect a population? They can respond. They can migrate, meaning they can go to another area and exploit new resources there. They might also be able to adapt, and this is a big one. Adaptation, remember, is random genetic changes to an organism's physical characteristics. It can be small or large, and it can sometimes, if some individual has a different adaptation, it will give them a better chance at survival and reproduction, and over time that starts to influence the rest of the population. Then the whole population can better exploit these limited resources or resist limiting resources. Okay. They might also increase their competition. You guys, the natural world is brutal. Nobody's nice to each other out there. They compete for resources. Okay. And then also what the final change is extirpation, which is local extinction. So you might see a group of fish that cannot adapt to a new temperature change in the water. That one population in one ecosystem, they might go extinct. But that same species of fish might live in another reef somewhere else and still be alive. So that local extinction we call extirpation, or the whole species will go extinct. If it's a large enough limited or limiting resource effect, we see extinction on a wide scale. We're seeing a lot of that right now, especially in the ocean. Okay, we'll talk about that cheerful subject at the end of the semester. Okay. So make sure you know all of those limited and limiting resources. Let's talk a little bit more about how populations and communities act. So communities are all of the populations of living things in an area, habitat, ecosystem, whatever you want to call it. So that's everything from the animals, the bacteria, the plankton, the algae, any vascular plants if we're in that kind of environment. So all of the living things in an area are called its community. Okay? So for example, all of the fishes and all of the invertebrates in a coral reef, plus all of the algae in a coral reef, that's called the coral reef's community. Okay. Out in the open ocean, all of the pelagic fishes like tuna and herring and mackerel and sharks, and all of the whales in the open ocean, as well as like the sea turtles and plankton. Plankton is a very important population in the community of the pelagic ocean. We'll talk more about that. Okay. Populations and communities, they work together to balance an ecosystem. And by work together, I don't mean that they have like conventions and stuff and team building exercises. They feed on each other. They feed each other. So they work, again, that circle of life in nature and in the ocean. Everything has to be at its optimal population level for all of the other populations in its community to also be at their optimal level. Okay, it's a giant balancing act in nature. Okay, that's all I have to talk about ecosystems today, just those basics. You have a couple of assignments that I would like you to do this week. They are on Canvas in the module. I'm going to stack this at the top of the modules with some links. Okay, your first assignment is where do the critters live? There is a link. I will make another video in the assignment page to show you how to run that. Okay, you'll need to do math. I'm sorry. And then your second assignment is lobsters and ocean warming, where you will read about what's going on with the Maine lobsters, you know, the most delicious of all of the crustaceans, in my opinion. You'll read an article and fill in an article evaluation form. So head on over to the assignments page and not assignments page, the pages for the assignments, and I'll show you how to get that done. That's all I have. Have a great day. Have a great week. Stay safe. Be smart. And hope to see you soon. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to me. And yep.